Hi, everyone. Welcome to the IDA documentary screening series. My name is Rizal Castillo. I'm the Public Programs and Events Manager here at the IDA. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have a great conversation with the filmmakers of Simple as Water, moderated by Jenelle Riley of Variety. I'd like to offer land acknowledgement coming from Los Angeles on the unceded land of the Chumash and Tongva people who have been stewards of this land for generations. I'd like to thank our media sponsor, IndieWire, for helping us bring this series to you. We have lots more virtual screenings available to IDA members through December 10th. Check out our lineup on our website at www.documentary.org/screening series. Now, let's welcome Jenelle. Hello, thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. As the nice woman told you, my name's Jenelle Riley. Thank you so much for joining us for this IDA conversation with Simple as Water. I'm here with ASL interpreter Andrea Lust. And please join me in welcoming director, producer, editor Megan Mylan, producer Robin Hessman, and co-producer Hazem Obid. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Congratulations on a beautiful movie. Before we get into the film, whenever I have people as accomplished as you all are, I actually like to go back to the beginning and sort of ask, what was your first job in this business? The first time, you felt you could call yourself a filmmaker or call yourself a producer? And let's start with Megan.
Oh, what a nice question. That was fun to travel. I, out of undergrad, started working in like international human rights issues and was working in Brazil, in Rio, as a grants maker. And I was 23, and the woman who ran the organization, who was appropriately Brazilian, left, and I became like interim director. And I got this very quick feeling of that might be the job I actually could deserve a decade from now, and I don't want it. It was a space I wanted to be in, but not the dynamic I wanted to be in. And so I found some Brazilian documentary filmmakers and started working with them, first as a volunteer and then, as a paid, who were doing a BBC documentary in the Amazon. And I literally was just like, getting gear and crew schedules and all of that, but it was a great way in, and the first time somebody wanted to pay me for my skills. So
is that the first time that you thought about documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, it was a really I met them, and it was sort of this like, oh, I mean, I'd love to say like my grandfather gave me a camera and I always wanted to make documentaries, but like other than a film about the telephone company I saw in elementary school, like I don't really remember documentaries from my childhood, but it just felt right. Like the interaction, of course, now there's so many layers to that interaction, but sort of at 23, it felt like, yes. And it was very much like a finding your tribe, people who wanted to interact with people who had very different life experiences and help be a bridge. And so it was a very like fortuitous, just random, went out with someone one night and they had a friend who was a Rio-based documentary filmmaker. So it, yeah. So
that's so cool. Robin, what about for you?
My first job in film, I was a freshman in college on an exchange in the last year of the existence of the Soviet Union. And that summer, I got a job at Len Film, the Leningrad Film Studios, working on a horror movie that starred Robert Englund, who's the Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street. So I was a second assistant director and a translator, because I spoke Russian by that point. And at one point my housing fell through, so he and his wife Nancy were very lovely and let me live in a room in their 2-story hotel room in the Pribaltskaya Hotel. And I was interested in film. I wanted to do film. I had done a lot of photography, and I had done a lot of theater, and I had done a lot of music. And I had been interested in Russia. But being there that semester, I realized all that I had read and looked at hadn't really prepared me for what it was going to be like. So when I got back to Russia for my junior year abroad, I went to film school. I went to VGIK, which is the all-Russian, it was the all-Soviet State Institute of Cinematography, but in between the Soviet Union had collapsed. And so I went to film school in Russia, and I was in a fiction class, but I just always made documentaries. So I guess, 18 was my horror movie experience. And then I guess 19 was my documentary experience beginning.
Now, I'm a hardcore horror fanatic, so I'm curious, what was the movie?
Oh, you can find it. I have never seen it. I have cameos in the background and stuff, but it was called Terror when we were shooting, and there was a coup that happened in the middle of it. So one day we were shooting at the palace where Rasputin was killed. That was supposed to be this ballet studio where Robert Englund was the ballet master. But we show up at work one day and there was the coup where Gorbachev was deposed, and they said, everybody go home. And it was quite dramatic. It is now, I believe it was released straight to video as Dance Macabre. It is on IMDb, and I kind of want to see it someday. Have you seen it?
I haven't, but I worked in a video store for years and I remember the box.
So I really am dying to see it because I want to see if I'm walking back, in the back of the canal. I would love to see it someday.
I can't believe you've never seen it.
I've never seen it. I mean, I lived in Russia then till 99, and I wound up producing Sesame Street in Russia for several years. So it wasn't in my video store when I moved back to the States in 99. So it only occurred to me many years later that I maybe could try to find it. But anyway, some people out there have seen it. So that was my early start.
Hazem, now you have to top that.
Well, it's easy. My beginning was basically on Simple as Water as a film, as a documentary. It was the first experience. I did a lot of student stuff before that. I came to Germany. Basically, that was my plan before the war, to travel outside of Syria and study film making, and that was still the plan, and the war added up just the fact that I need to go now. It's not just a choice. So basically, when we first met, I was in the university still studying stuff that to do with media and recording and all the stuff. So I went to Megan with the student experience, and she knew that. And
wow.
I don't know if she's regretted, but yeah, that
so
was my first a professional level work.
Wow, that's amazing. It's all downhill from here. So.
And I'm not trying to get dragged through it. I'm just hanging still to my ideas and my video production stuff and all that, fall back. But now I'm loving it, and I think I'm getting the hang of it.
Well, I would love to start at the beginning with Megan. You've obviously made several excellent films that are both, sort of epic and worldwide, but also very personal. I'm thinking of obviously Lost Boys of Sudan and the Oscar-winning Smile, Pinki. Where did you even begin with Simple as Water? Do your films tend to start with a person or an idea, or does it change every time?
I think, as many filmmakers will say, each one is a relationship. One of the things that had happened between the last feature I made and this one is that I became a mom. And so I had a 3, almost 4-year-old as I got into this, who's now 9. So it took us a while. But, for me, parenthood changed the way I see the world, and therefore changed my filmmaking. And so it was really as a mom that I came to this story. And so back in 2015 and in 2016, I was really, fixated watching what was happening to Syria. And I was also sort of mentally in a place of sort of those big, profound thinking that having a small child does to you about all of the beauty and joy in the world, and then all of the loss and injustice. And you just sort of, at least for me, I saw it anew. And so having Syria and what was happening to Syrians be part of that, I was drawn to it, and sort of starting each morning with the news, and particularly with photographs of parents cradling their children, that was my connect in. And I was thinking what there was that was additive that I could say. There was so much footage coming out, so much news reporting, but also so much intimate, cell phone footage and GoPro footage from Syrians themselves, and as you mentioned, I had made a film about a refugee journey story before Boys of Sudan. And so I was sort of trying to figure out whether I had anything to contribute or whether I should just write checks to people who were, doing the right things, and then one of the photographs that I imagine you and everyone listening would remember, Alan Coody, who was a little Syrian boy whose body washed up on the shore. And I just couldn't stop looking at that photo. And in particular, I was heartbroken and outraged. And in particular, focusing on his socks and shoes. His shoes had these Velcro ties. And that morning, I had been working with my son to help him do his own Velcro ties. And so it felt like, if I'm having this entry, then other people are too. And that felt valid. So it was really from this very primal space of motherhood that I felt like I had a valid connection with the families and sort of a right to come into it. And so then to try and tell the story of war through the lens of parenthood, we had to sort of figure out how do you do that with something as epic as this? And I was like, what is the family story that would take us through? Because mainly I've worked on often very singular character-driven films. Mm-hmm. And it felt like one family story was too anemic, not enough for the epic scale of the upheaval and devastation that had happened. And so I really spent one of those, I don't always have these, I have a lot of busy email weeks, but this was one of those take long walks and think, kind of times. And I actually landed on this film, 32 short films about Glenn Gould that I've always loved, that's about a pianist, right? And so at first I thought, well, that sort of fragmented and fractured and multi-layered story felt right for this film. And so at first I thought, well, maybe one will be, just a oral history and one will be archival and one will, and then I kind of, was like, well, what can I actually do well? And that was multiple character-driven observational portraits. So the film that resulted is, the family experience of war told through the lens of parenthood in these 5 distinct family portraits of Syrian families in different places.
And for the producers, how did each of you come to be involved with the film? What sort of attracted you to the project initially?
Well, Megan and I had met many, many years ago at a producers academy that PBS had for people, and we had stayed in touch and been friendly. And we ran into each other at an event, and I had also become a mom in the same time. I had, I think at that point a 3 and 4-year-old, and she just started telling me about this film she was making, and I also had decided to put a hold on directing for a little while and focus on producing, we started talking about this film, and she showed me she had already filmed in Greece. And she showed me the footage, and this beautiful, intimate footage of this family. It was the family that once I saw that footage and was listening to the way that she was talking about it, and also had this kind of shared entry, I couldn't say no. So it really was, it was the story and the approach, and the fact that this is such a huge global, the scope of this, and I love that she was telling it through so many families, but it really was the beauty and the poetry and the intimacy of the footage that is what brought me in.
Hazem?
To me, I got approached by a producer of the film, a childhood friend of mine, Allah, and Megan wanted somebody to work with her in Germany. And at first I thought, refugees film, never. And I was this was a direct no. They're just on the face of it, because through all this Syrian tragedy, I refused to, jump on those chances of just being able to work out of a catastrophe or something. And also personally, I didn't feel good about it. But then I talked to Megan about it, and she has a different approach. She had it's not a war movie, it's about parenthood. And from this point of view, okay, my mother is on the way to Germany through the Balkan route and all those stuff. And I thought, Well, let's go. And I talk and talk and talk to her. But basically, I was on the phone. I just fell in love with it, and yeah, still am.
And you talked about, telling the stories through these sort of 5 vignettes. How did you go about sort of meeting and deciding, which stories to tell?
There's reasons this took many, many years, right? And so, because we wanted to get the story right, and we actually, but not just what ended up in the film, we wanted to get to that footage the right way too. And so it was really, a first pass was a lot of talking and listening to families who had been through exactly this, NGO and refugee advocates, freelance journalists who knew much more. So really like a deep dive, almost like post-grad, listening tour. And asking people like, what are those common themes? I was sort of envisioning like that each chapter would have this like decisive sort of question or decision that the parent had to make. And so trying to understand what those common themes were and that are kind of universal to the Syrian experience and actually to the experience of families fleeing war. And so there were some dynamics of children taking on adult responsibilities, which you see in both our Turkey and USA chapter, or just the gender norm flip that happens where women are taking on different roles in their family than they might have, before had they not been widowed or separated. Just the absolute Kafkaesque, horrible limbo of these bureaucracies that let like huge swaths of a child's childhood go by as a form isn't filled out in time or an office closes, those sort of themes. So we landed on the themes. Then we figured out how and where do we find those families? So are they, in Jordan crossing the border? It was very important to have stories in countries that neighbor Syria because that's where the vast majority of the refugees are. They're in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. Even though here in the US, we're hearing about Sweden and Germany more, but so we have storylines there. Half of the country has fled, but half of the country is still there. So we had a storyline in Syria. And so the way we worked was to create this sort of ecosystem of these small, like finely curated teams of people from all over the world, always with at least one, often many more Syrians as part of that team, but also like choosing the camera and the sound people carefully to be able to identify the families and then bring them in as collaborators, bring their trust. So I'm not a collaborative director in the sense of like, now we'd like you to do this. Like it's not, directed in that way, but it is in the way of only once we get your buy-in and your trust, can you sort of go about your business so that we know when the cameras are rolling, that trust is really a bedrock already. And so the relationships, they predate the filming and they go on after. And Hazem and our other, Syrians on the team were absolutely fundamental to being able to do that. So we filmed the first 2 chapters of the film first. Anyway, I don't want to give away, no spoilers. It's not really that kind of a film, but anyway, there were chapters we didn't know were going to happen, so it was, it's an all, not to answer more questions than you've asked, but it was an all grant funded film. So there was a lot of like proof of concept and then going out and earning, the buy-in of arts grant makers, but also grant makers who are concerned about refugee issues and are really sophisticated about those portrayals and showing that we were finding ways into these families' stories that gave them complexity and individuality, but also at the same time touched on universal themes, which I find is a bit of a delicate dance to not oversimplify things.
Can I jump on one of the universal themes, which is not only that children take on adult responsibilities, but that people take on the role of parents who are not parents themselves. So while we talk about parenthood, it isn't actually always a biological parent who is being a parent in the film as well. It's really family overall.
You talked about, how you built that trust between I say you as an entity, the three of you, and your subjects. And it's so apparent in just how organic and real and raw everything feels. Can you sort of talk about how you go about building that trust? I don't know, Megan, for you as the director, but also I'm assuming the producers are very involved with the subjects.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll let Hazem continue. Maybe I'll start and say, I mean, I think my first step is finding the right Hazems. So, you know, we talk to a lot of different people, and I mean, there are people who have fabulous skill sets that if they don't sort of signal, if they don't sort of get the approach or signal the right balance between being a human being and being a filmmaker, that is a good fit, because it has to be just very organic for me, of like, we're all here and we all understand, like, we care desperately about the art and the professionalism, but we care more about these people and the way we get there. And so finding the right people, and then really, you know, kind of trusting them and giving them room. I mean, Hazem and Zakia and like all of our different people who were in the field had loads of conversations and meetings and cafes, you know, to understand what was going on for these families and then translate it to us so we could figure out, because we actually shot for a very few number of days, but their work was loads and loads of days before and after. And so that, I mean, the pre-production is massive compared to the production, and the post-production of just, even though like the people we filmed in the film weren't involved in the editing, but our relationships with them continued afterwards. So I don't know, Hazem, I mean, it's, you know, when you're, I mean, because, you know, to assume that Hazem has anything in common with Yasmin and Safwan, I mean, you're from very different places, right? Like, I mean, you know our Syria story line because that's your hometown, but anyway, sorry, I talked more.
I felt some kind of responsibility. Of course, I have the access. I have I'm from the town. It's like I'm a neighbor of those, a serious neighbor. Like a 1 hour, I can be in the town of Safwan, from my own town, Masyaf, to his, and this helps, and it needs work also, because I felt like what Megan wanted is to keep everybody true, even herself. So so basically that was the first thing, like basically just building the trust, keeping like staying. It is frustrating to work 6 months on something, and then the team comes for 3 days, and then we did the shooting, and then okay, goodbye, and then 6 months also from also follow-up and stuff. It is fascinating, because this is, I feel like I live the story more than everybody else. I live those stories more than anybody else, and well, the film does, the editing does also speak stuff that I can't imagine, but yeah, it just was a privilege.
Hazem, actually, when we were talking the other day, I really liked how you said how this moment where you have to kind of the professionalism versus the social worker. Do you want to say about the timing of that? I just really liked how you phrased that.
This is maybe the in the first half of an hour of talking to Megan, that was very clear. You will feel, and you felt, we felt it, well, everybody felt it. You feel the need to put the social app and start engaging in their lives and start changing and start solving problems. You'll feel the responsibility for that. And it was very hard to have this separation between, until we shoot, everybody stays as it is. And you can't say, well, how about you guys to go do things differently? How about this? I have a better solution here. Somebody who knows, like those are my people, and having solutions and not being able to talk with them about it until the filming is done is difficult. So just filmmaker hat, social worker hat, and then just having this right balance between both of them when we are still working on the film.
But then, of course, when the filming is done, we do get to put our human being and social worker hat on and help. I mean, the hours and hours on the phone with, Omar is probably my closest relationship of all of the subjects of the film. And so just even helping navigate schools, he's in the US, and like schools and decisions. And he wanted to have another degree. And I mean, people will see in the film what happens with them. But just, all of the relationships are so rich, and the texting of photos, and we're all part of lives, and can give advice once we've represented their lives truthfully. Then we can help. Then we can be people who would help anybody who you think you can help.
You said this is not a film about a bunch of filmmakers helping people.
Yes.
So that's it.
I actually want to talk about the filmmaking style because, it's shot in this very cinema verite style. You don't have talking heads or narration like some other documentaries. Megan, I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on the films of yours that I've seen, I don't think you ever do that.
She is the standard bearer of verite for our generation. I feel.
Can you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with documentaries through, direct cinema, the classics like, Maisels and Pennebaker, Les Blanc, who actually, often you feel his presence in the films more, but just sort of a open, flowing style. So it's what comes very organically to me. I like lots of different styles of filmmaking, but this is an expression that I feel like I can add complexity to, because it's not something I have to overthink, because it just kind of comes naturally. And it's a way for me to be in the presence of people who are experiencing things that I feel like are worthy of the world understanding more, but maybe giving me a little bit of a cop out of that. I don't have to be exactly the judge of what moment. I mean, of course we do that in the choices of who we focus and where the camera focuses and what makes in the editing, but I feel like to a greater degree in verite, there's room for an audience to come in with their own life experience and their own emotion, and connect with the characters and what's happening in the film in their own ways. And so the film, sorry, something flew by, the film takes on layers that I didn't anticipate. And I mean, sometimes in rough cut screenings, you're like, oh, I didn't anticipate that, and that is not accurate and not what we want to be sending. And then you figure out, where have we edited to mislead? But other times it's just layers that are there, and because of my own limited life experience, I didn't feel or perceive them. And so then those are, things we can heighten. But it felt like a way I could do justice to this is just to be, it's sort of, I think of the films as sort of my experience of being with these people. It is not the only thing that happened on that day, but it is what it felt like for me to sit with Yasmin, or for me to be with a group of fathers, who are isolated from their families, getting their hair cut at the end of a long work day and sort of unloading to each other. And so that's the authenticity that I can offer you, having done my homework ahead of time and surrounded myself with people who know a lot more than I do about the dynamic.
But also it's also filmed in CinemaScope. It's also filmed beautifully. Sure. And you spend a lot of time on the craft of it as well, and the soundscapes of it as well.
Of course. And I think with this film in particular, because the themes of loss are so acute and intense, and the relationship between parent and child, I find one so primal and beautiful and sort of not described, doesn't have words for, that this felt like something that cinema could do in a way that other forms might be lacking. And so I wanted the cinematography to have that too. And Lars Scree, who shot for us, I had seen a film of his called Armadillo, where they embed with a Danish team in Afghanistan, and it managed to be very poetic without, to me, feeling artifice. It felt very authentic in those moments, and there was a lot of like very traditional sort of rough verite, but also just this lyricism to it. And that this is such a flow of emotion rather than plot point film, that filmic style felt really important. And then having, yes, like Robin mentioned, the soundscape stuff of having sound recordists who, you know, had such deep pride in their craft and would get all of the subtlety, because one of the things, like I think of each of the portraits as this, like the sacred space of family. And it's that, you know, that touch, that humor that only you know, those little glances. And often these families were having to do that in very public settings because they had no privacy. They're having to create that. And so that somebody who could actually get me like the stroke of a mom's hand, even when there's like a giant truck going by, like right before and after, but like be a presence that was gentle enough to let those scenes unfold without changing the dynamic. So everybody, I mean, it's such a team effort, filmmaking, and especially in this one with like our multi-layered stories and just the need to, you know, be slow in our approach and respectful, you know, people in very fragile states. And it wasn't, I mean, one of the things that I think everyone on the team understood is that this wasn't about like one big moment. So if we just weren't feeling it, we could just like, even though we had like relatively a short number of dates each time we came, like we could let it go because these themes were continuous and they would come around to us again. And if we were looking for the right things, we didn't need one single moment. It was going to happen. Maybe the light wouldn't be quite as great, you know. I mean, we want the great shots too. Like I'm not like a total, you know, for me, it's that constant dance. It's like, how do you get the artistry and get it in the right way? And it's just like a constant layered act and help the people you're filming and the crew feel like they're in good directing hands, and that I'm not going to ask for things unless I've thought through all the layers of it. And the people in the film feel free, you know, to just be themselves rather than like, you know, should I do this now? Like, I mean, the second anyone we're filming asks, like, do you want me to walk this way or that way? I've sort of failed. So, you know.
Robin, you mentioned, you know, being in touch with Omar, and I'm curious, for people who have just seen the film, can you sort of tell us what the subjects are? I feel so cold referring to them as subjects, but can you, you know, let us know what these people are up to today?
Shall I? Sure. Well, Omar and Aboudi have moved to Houston, and Aboudi graduated from high school and is really wants to go to a 4-year college right now, looking at community college. And Omar is starting a business. So after the film, he wound up through somebody that we met through Sundance Catalyst program. Her husband had a company and they opened the door for an interview with him. He never finished his bachelor's in computer science in Aleppo. So without a degree, he was having a hard time getting any job that he could have done, and was having all of these, as you see in the film, like very difficult physical jobs. And he had an interview from someone who wouldn't have interviewed him without that chance, and wound up doing QA, like quality assurance for tech things. And it just kind of changed his life. And now he's starting a company to help train and give other refugees the chance to have the doors open to them, or he's kind of going to be like a broker to help getting them QA jobs. And so he'll provide extra training, and he'll be like the reassurance for clients that they can do this work. So he just wants people to have that extra chance and that open door that he might not have gotten without a little extra help. So that's what's happening. So they're doing, and Omar got married. He has 2 beautiful little girls. I mean, there's some great things happening.
Just say that it's you know, people are doing well. Yasmin's children are in school and they're enormous. You know, it's how you go from like 7 to 12, and Hazem was speaking with Yasmin yesterday, and then, you know, there are others. Storylines, our Syria storyline, the mom, you know, who grapples with the not knowing about her son, is still in that moment of not knowing whether she can do anything to bring him back. You know, that impossible, I mean, that I think would be the dynamic were your child to be kidnapped, right? Like this, like, if I just look one more time, if I just answer one more Facebook message, and then sort of pulling back and wanting to grieve and not grieve. And so, you know, I mean, it's, and even for, you know, the families where they've landed somewhere that feels like some resolution and stable and better. I mean, these are wounds that, you know, reverberate for a long time to come. So, you know, we were very sort of conscious in trying to have the film be kind of a moment in time where it's not a longitudinal look at each of these stories, but it's sort of like deep dive for a moment, and then they sort of hand off to each other, so that you sort of collectively have this feeling of like, whenever I read about war, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
You know, in very specific ways, lives are being turned upside down and families are being ruptured, and they will do everything in their possibility to get back to as good as they can possibly be together again. But, you know, with those wounds as part of them now. So I don't mean to be all doom and gloom. The film has a lot of joy in it.
That's,
I mean,
yes.
people,
No, and
that's part of it too. But like, I think, you know, folks are doing as well as they can.
But of course, what they'd really like is for the situation in Syria to be different, so they could all just go back home. I think that's one thing that people don't always realize. People would rather just be home and be in a safe situation and have their lives back and their homes back and the place where their family was from. And that, you know, there's always this question of, will that ever happen? I mean, historically, look at all of the places where there's been a rupture and people have had to flee their home. And then sometimes there are decades or generations of people wondering, will I ever get home again? So even when things are better, there's always this question of, will they return home? But to echo Megan's, for all of the fact that this is a film about Syrian refugees, there is a lot of smiles and joy and moments in it. I mean, right, Jenelle, you saw it.
yeah, that's what I love about it, because it is obviously serious subject matter, but it's really about celebrating family and this bond of love. And it's not ever maudlin. And I think that's such a hard needle to thread. It is such a special movie. I want to thank you all so much for being here today. And again, congratulations on a beautiful film. And thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.